What's up, everybody? I'm Chef Joe. This is Chef Gone Carnivore, and thanks for tuning in to another one of these videos. For those of you who are new to my journey, I started carnivore about 5 months ago. I'm down about 60 pounds, and I'm trying to lose close to 200 pounds on the carnivore diet, and I'm just starting my journey. And so I've been sharing my updates and then also some of the things I've been cooking and eating. I thought I'd make some stock today and film it and pop it up here for anyone who's looking for some help in making beef stock or some tips, or who are just curious about how I do it. Stock is just a great way to add flavor to your cooking. It's a great base for soups and for sauces, great base for braising liquids, lots of things that we can use in the carnivore diet. Generally, I will buy my New York strips and my ribeyes and things bone in. If I'm in the mood, I'll cook it bone in because they actually taste better when they're cooked on the bone. However, most of the time I will just trim those bones off myself. I'll leave a little bit of meat on them too, so it makes my stock taste better. And then I just put them in a food saver bag, suck the air out of it, and pop it in my freezer. And then when I'm ready to make stock and I have 6 months worth of bones saved up, I'll just pull those out and use them. Like for me, I save up all these steak bones. However, those aren't the best bones for stock, so I'll usually supplement those bones and go out and buy a couple packs of beef neck bones. That's what I usually get because they're cheap, and I can find them easily. Generally, the bones you want to use for, ideally used for beef stock, are marrow bones or leg bones, knuckles, and beef necks. And then apart from those, as far as the bones go, you could also use short rib, you could use beef cheek, and you could use oxtail. Those are all great cuts to use for stock as well. If you buy oxtail, part of the oxtail is real big and has a lot of meat on it, like the top section of the tail. You don't want to use those for stock. You want to use those for a meal because oxtail is absolutely phenomenal. And with all that meat on it, you don't want it just to go to stock. You want to actually prepare that for a meal because it's out of this world. However, the bottom half of the tail are generally very small like that. And there's very little meat on them, but there is a ton of collagen in those lower sections of the tail. So if you buy oxtail, half of them in there are usually real small with little meat. Use those for stock. Let's go ahead and look at how I prepare and make stock at home for the carnivore diet. All right, so here we go. We've got our beef bones. They've been patted dry with a paper towel. I've got my oven preheated to 350. And we are just going to go ahead and roast these until they're really nice and dark brown. Now, in addition to these rib bones that I've cut from steaks, and you'll notice that I purposefully left quite a bit of meat on some of these. And that is just so my stock has a little bit more flavor. Rather than trying to get every scrap off the bone when I do the steak, I just leave some on. It makes it a lot quicker to trim, and then it helps the stock out. So if that is how you like to do it, buy them bone in and save the bones for stock, I recommend just leaving a little bit of meat on the bones just for the sake of the stock having better beef flavor. In addition to these rib bones, I'm also going to be roasting neck bones. I have those in another batch, as well as like a rack from a prime rib roast. And those are all going to go into several batches of beef stock that I'm making today. Now, if we were in a restaurant doing this, like a traditional beef stock, I would also roast all of the veggies. So like your classic French mirepoix, onion, carrots, celery. That would all get roasted, especially the onions, real nice and dark. And then usually you'll spread like some tomato paste over to get it even darker. But being a carnivore beef stock, I'm not doing any of that. It's just going to be bones and meat today. So I'm not going to get quite as much color out of my stock as I would if I were using some vegetables and tomato paste to get even darker roast. But it'll still have a ton of flavor, and then I'll still be able to keep it like strict carnivore. So yeah, let's go ahead and roast these, and then when they're done, we'll show you what the next step is. All right, so we've got those bones roasted here. Really nice color on these. And then you'll notice on the bottom of this pan, you've got a lot of brown bits from where the bones and meat were laying. that is something you do not want to let go to waste. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna deglaze that with some water. Right when it comes out of the oven, you can drain some of this fat off of it and then pour a little bit of water in there and just scrape it up with a metal spatula. And then that brown bits will help give your stock nice flavor and nice color. All right, so I put about a cup of water in there. And then I'm just gonna start to loosen up the stuff on the bottom. Now, the hotter your pan is, the hotter the water is, the easier this will be. If your pan is sturdy enough, you can put this on heat and then pour the water in, and that'll just deglaze it right off real nice and easy. All right, so I'm just coming through with this spatula here and just scraping up everything off of the bottom of the pan. All that color and all that flavor we want in our stock. We don't want it left in the pan. We don't want to wash it down the sink. So the one thing, the one caveat to this is if you've burned the bits on the bottom so it's black instead of dark brown, don't even bother with this. It's going to make your stock bitter. It's going to taste bad. You don't want the burn, but you do want a deep brown. The darker the brown, the better. So all of this here is just going to go into the stock pot, and then I'll top it off with water. All right, so I actually made one batch of beef stock with a heavier roast. And then, as you saw, I deglazed the pan with water to get up all those brown bits off of the bottom of the pan. And then I made another one with a little bit lighter of a roast. It wasn't in quite as long. And then I did not deglaze the pan. The reason I did that is I wanted to show you what the extra step does for your stock. So here are the two stocks. The flavor is definitely stronger in the darker one. This one still actually has pretty good beef flavor, even though it's not super dark. But not quite as beefy of a flavor as this one. But you can see the difference is pretty staggering. So taking that extra step and getting a really good roast on those bones, and then using water to deglaze the pan that you roast the bones in to pull up all the brown bits on the bottom, and then putting that water in the pressure cooker with the bones makes a really big difference in how your stock's going to turn out. However, if you don't have the time or the desire to do that, you can still make a good beef broth without that extra step. It'll just be lighter, a little bit more subtly flavored, but still pretty good. All right, now I've just added enough water to come to the top of the bones. I don't want to fill it up too much or else the stock will be watery and bland. So I just took water up to the very top of the bones. You'll notice in this that the pressure cooker was only halfway up. In my other batches of stock that I made for this, it was filled all the way up to the max line. So it just matters, depends on how many bones you have. But either way, you're just going to put all your bones and neck bones and any trimmings that you have for stock, pop them into your pressure cooker or your stock pot, and then just fill it up with water until it reaches the top of the bones, whether it's halfway up or 3/4 up, just to the top of the bones. On my cooker here, I use the soup stew option, and the longest it lets me go is an hour, so I'm going to do it for an hour, but then I'm going to let it unpressurized by itself, so it'll take another 20 minutes or so. All right, now if you do not have a pressure cooker at home or an Instant Pot, those are the same thing, both pressure cookers. If you don't have access to one of those, you can still make this stock with a stock pot. And instead of putting the bones in the pressure cooker, you're going to put them in the pot. Same thing, you're going to fill it up with water until it gets to the top of the bones and then let it cook. So if you're not using a pressure cooker, instead of it taking an hour to make stock, you'll be looking more like 8 to 12 hours. That's a long time and a big commitment. That's why I like using a pressure cooker. Now the pressure cooker will extract more minerals out of the bones because it's boiling at a higher temperature than without the pressure cooker. Traditionally in a stock, you wouldn't want that extra cloudiness that will cause, but because I'm not making consommes out of it, I'm not doing stuff I would use a stock for professionally, I'm not worried about that. With what I'm doing at home, I like that it cuts the time down to an hour, which is really nice. All right, so this has come to a stop here. We got the hour of cook and then about 20 minutes of depressurization. So I'm just gonna reach in here with a pair of tongs first and just pull out the big pieces of bone and meat that are in there. And then once I've got all the big pieces out with my tongs, then I'll go ahead and strain it to get out all the smaller pieces, and then we'll have our stock finished. All right, so I've got a couple of strainers here that I generally use for stock. One, these are China cap style strainers. You can use a different type of strainer if that's what you have. But they're kind of like a cone shaped. And you can see that these have small holes in them. And this will trap some of the bigger debris in the stock. And then I've got a Chinois, which is this guy here, which is a really fine mesh strainer. And generally I like to strain it through this one first to clear out some of the bigger stuff so it doesn't clog this guy up. So I just set them inside of one another. That's how I do it. But if you just have one size strainer, that's fine, use that. Generally you want it to be fairly small holes, because you want to try to get most of that debris out of the stock. And then I like to pour my stock into a large shallow pan, just so it cools down faster. But I'm just gonna finish straining the stock through these strainers, and then we'll pick up from there. All right, so here we got the beef stock. You can see it's got a pretty nice dark color. That's gonna have nice flavor, nice beef flavor. And that's all from the roasting process. And then all this kind of sparkly, foamy stuff on top is fat that's in there. Now, if this was like a French kitchen or a culinary school or whatever, you would not want fat in your stock. You'd want it completely clear and free from fat. And so, but for me, since this is for me to eat on the carnivore diet, I want that fat in it. And actually, once it's cooled, this will create a cap on top. And it's actually really easy to remove the fat once it's cooled, because it all floats to the top and becomes solid. So that's nice and easy. But you can see it's got nice color to the stock. That's what we're looking for. Nice and brown. And that's just from the roast that we got on those bones and on the meat that was on the bones. All right, so I pretty much picked these bones clean. You can see it's like really tender braised beef. Now I like some of the parts that connect the muscle to the bone. So when I go through, I just grab the bone like this, and I just start going through, and I just start pulling it off with my fingers. And anything I can grab, if I can squeeze it and it just comes off in my fingers like that just did, that's good to eat. This is like, kind of still like a rubber band. So that didn't break down in that process, so I'm not going to bother with saving that. But I just mix all that together. So this is beef and connective tissue that has softened, that is broken down and is super gelatinous. Very, very delicious. So this is good to eat. I'm going to eat this as a meal tomorrow or maybe the next day. I could also pour in, a cup or two of that broth and season it up with some salt and just have a nice beef soup with chunks of beef in it. It'll be really delicious. But this is really good meat. Don't throw it away. It's good to use. However, this is going to be super bland because it's just been boiled in water, basically. So I'm going to want to season this with some salt. Okay, so one question is, do you season a stock or not? Do you want to add salt or do you not? You'll notice that I didn't add any salt to my stock, and there's a reason for that. Not because I don't want the salt. It's I want that stock to be as versatile as possible. I want to be able to use it for braises. I want to be able to use it for soups. I want to be able to use it for sauces. I want to be able to use it for like a demi-like reduction. If all you're going to be doing is drinking it, you're not going to use it for cooking at all, then feel free to go ahead and season it to the way you like it. Generally, I recommend starting at about 1/4 teaspoon per cup. I use kosher salt. So start at 1/4 teaspoon per cup and then taste it. And if it's not as salty as you like it, add some more salt. But that's a good starting point. That usually gets it to a baseline salt level. And then from there, season it to your liking. So I've even had some people go up to about 1/2 teaspoon per cup. It just depends on what your preference is and what kind of salt you're using. So generally, I don't season it. I store it unseasoned. That way I can use it for anything. If it's salty already, I can't reduce it anymore, which limits me on what I'm able to do with that stock. But if you don't season it and you have it in your freezer and you pull it out and you're going to drink it, then you can say, okay, I'm going to take a cup of stock. I'll add a 1/4 teaspoon because that's how I like it. And then it's ready to go. Totally painless. But if you do that ahead of time, then you pretty much are only able to use that stock in its current format. You're not able to reduce it at all. So that's why I do not add salt to my stocks until I'm actually ready to use them, and I'll season it depending on how I am going to use it. All right, so it is important to note that when you make stock, you need to be aware of the cooling process. I recommend following, especially with stock, I recommend following the health code guidelines, which are you have 2 hours to get the stock from 140 degrees to below 70 degrees. That range is where bacteria has its heyday. And so you want to try to move that stock through that danger zone, as it's called, as quickly as possible, but certainly within 2 hours if you can. There are several ways that can aid you in doing this. The first way is using a large shallow pan to cool it instead of a small deep pan. So you don't really want to put them in like deli containers or something where they're fairly like small surface area but are deep. That will take a lot longer to cool than if you use like a large baking dish or something like that, where the stock only comes 3 or 4 inches up. So it's only 3 or 4 inches deep instead of like 8 inches deep. So the depth of it is really what you're most concerned with. So the more shallow the stock while you're cooling it, it will cool much quicker. I also do not recommend putting the stock directly in the fridge right when it's done, because that you're putting a 200-degree stock in a refrigerator and it's going to steam like crazy and it's going to warm up your fridge. So then it'll take even longer to cool. So I recommend leaving it, pouring it into a shallow container, letting it sit at room temperature until it hits 140 degrees. Once it hits 140, which can take anywhere from like a half hour to an hour to get to that point, then you'll want to cool it to under 70 in 2 hours. And so the shallow pan works great. And then another tool that can help you get it quicker is to take like a Ziploc baggie of ice cubes and close it and then stir the stock with that bag of ice. You could use an actual ice paddle if you have one. Most people don't have an ice paddle. So just use a Ziploc bag of ice and just stir it in that. So as the ice melts, it's not diluting your stock. It stays within that Ziploc bag, but you're still cooling it from the middle of the stock out. So that works really well. Another option is to, once it cools to around 140 degrees, pour it into Ziploc bags, if that's how you're gonna store them, and then pop those Ziploc bags into a freezer, and then those will cool very quickly in a freezer. No matter how you decide to cool it, you just want to pay attention and make sure you're getting it from 140 to under 70 in 2 hours, and then you have 4 hours to get it from 70 degrees to under 40 degrees.